the alliances I have, I direct the Art Science Center, which now is in its first decade, and it's located in the School of the Arts, the Broad School of the Arts in the north, and California Nanosystems Institute in the south. So what we do is we go back and forth, and it keeps us in good shape because they're on opposite sides of campus. I also work with the University of Tokyo and University of Tsukuba. I'm a visiting professor there, and recently at the University of Linz in Austria. And Tsukuba, I'm a part of the Empowerment Informatics program. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. So to give you a little background, because I'm sure you know very little about me. My father was a diplomat from ex-Yugoslavia, and by coincidence I was born here, and then I grew up part of my life, in my beginning life, in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and then we went to New York City. So I spent almost no time in Yugoslavia, actually, and now it doesn't exist. So there you go. But while we were in New York City, when I was in high school, my father was obsessed with Nikola Tesla. Because at that time, in the 70s, most people assumed that Edison discovered electricity. And actually, honestly, very few people knew of Nikola Tesla. It's it's actually only in the last couple of decades. And so he really wanted to bring that to the American public, and he found his relatives who were still living in New York. He died in New York City, actually quite impoverished. And so we met his relatives. I was going to labs, and I was surrounded by scientists, and I saw this picture very early on. I think I was 10 or 11. And it just was amazing to me. And then I met some physicists and scientists, and I fell in love with it, but my teachers were horrible in science. I mean, they were just like a nightmare, and they turned all of us off to science. So I think if I had a good teacher, I probably would be a full-on scientist, but I didn't. So I went into arts, and I did a lot of my own learning about science. So cut to, after school and going to Academy of Fine Arts, etc., and before doing a PhD, I was, by some luck, invited to be in Venice Biennale right out of graduate school. Normally you have to go through your whole career to get there. I don't know how that happened. But amazingly, the topic, the name of the Biennale was Art and Science. And I was showing an installation that was pretty much sculptures and paintings and dealing with light, but relatively kind of old school type installation. And next to me was Brian Eno, who's a musician, and he had these light boxes and music, and I just thought, wow, that's amazing. And then his professor came to visit him, or ex-professor, Roy Ascott. Roy Ascott is a conceptual artist from the UK, and he, in 1986, did a telematic performance where he actually connected on the internet, which didn't even exist as a web, and created an art piece. And that, to me, was mind-boggling. I just never imagined that could even be art. So I started connecting to him, and eventually he became my professor, which I'll talk about in a second. But my love for science actually became really close to my life. I got married to a nuclear physicist, and our honeymoon was in Egypt. And the first piece that I did that was connecting art and science was actually dealing with the pyramids of Giza. What's fascinated me was, we actually got an award for it, but what fascinated me about it is that at that time they were hitting the pyramids of Giza with cosmic rays and looking for places where there would be hidden chambers. And this was in 1986. at that time, they couldn't really find anything, but what's amazing is that this was just in April 2016. A Japanese team actually managed to find chambers using cosmic rays. Now, what I found at that time amazing is the way I perceived the pyramids as this incredible sculpture and cultural, just amazing. I'm speechless to even think about it as a cultural edifice and what it meant and the geometry of it. But the scientists were talking about it very matter of fact. And they would just talk about the geometry, the size of it, and all of it was very much about the math of it. And then for the first time, they explained to me about cosmic rays. So I don't know, are you guys familiar with the idea of cosmic rays?
What's the actual source of cosmic rays you guys used? Where is the cosmic ray generated?
Nova.
It comes from space.
It's from
Like
space.
gray aliens.
It's from space. So they were actually following the cosmic. We're getting bombarded by cosmic rays right now.
Yeah.
So the nano labs and labs in general actually do a lot of preparation and ways to protect their experiments from cosmic rays because they could get disturbed. But in this case, they really wanted to use them. So this is an interesting thing. And through my marriage to the nuclear physicist Bogdan Maglic, I also met the late Glenn Seaborg and actually found that he announced the discovery of the element that's called after him, Seaborgian, on the radio. So it was like a game, and then they asked, well, what's this element? And they announced it. So I started getting very interested in how popular culture and arts connect to sciences, and doing a lot of interviews with scientists like Seaborg and Mary Gelman, who was an incredible person to meet and talk to. And I realized actually that they're really creative, just like artists, maybe even more somehow. So that led me to be invited to do a CD-ROM project with Stephen Hawking, and that was an incredible experience because it confronted me with, first of all, having to I was at UC Santa Barbara at that point, and we got a paper of his called Life in the Universe, and we were asked to translate it into a CD-ROM. We had to really just learn while we're doing it and explain in visuals and interactive CD-ROM, which was very early. So this was around 97, 98. But what was amazing to me about that experience of working with Hawking was first of all, the idea of how much, without the computer, we would not be able to hear anything he has to say. So the computer-human interface became so important and critical to me to think about in relation to artwork and consciousness, and how we're changing our consciousness was actually manifest in this person. But also in relation to time and to understanding our own minds and how much we take for granted. So for instance, if I say hello to Stefan, it would be like this. Hello. Hello. So that's just seconds, right? But we just take it for granted that we say something, that vibration goes to your brain, you register it, you say it back to me, and we just exchange this so quickly. So I started really being interested more and more in the computer machine flesh interface, if you will, and also the idea of consciousness and how we're related and what the machines are doing with us. So the first project I did to experiment with the World Wide Web and this is very quickly, I won't talk about it too much, but I started thinking about how you can visualize human bodies and creating these avatars on the web. And this is 1996, so it was when the web just started. And I thought it would be really interesting to create textures and 3D models, and you could pick your body parts and put them together, and it would be part of this company that's called Bodies Incorporated, and each texture would have a meaning, and you could have it in 3D, and then it could be output as a sculpture. All of this that I visualized actually now can happen, so we're going to experiment with 3D, but at that point it was more like a vision. And then I started working at that point, at 96, 97, I started my PhD program, which was mentioned, Lindsay mentioned earlier. In Santa Barbara, the Buckminster Fuller archives were in Santa Barbara. And I met Allegra Fuller, his daughter, who heard my talks a few times and then actually invited me to be a resident in the Buckminster Fuller archives, which was amazing. Now you couldn't possibly do that because they're at Stanford and it's much more regulated. At that point, I was literally like in somebody's house alone, going through paperwork and books and all his amazing things that he was thinking about and working on. And I started really trying to figure out how could I employ some of those ideas, some of those prototypes, the geometries in virtual space and connect virtual and digital spaces. One of my first experiments was in Germany in a mine, and it was in the year 2000 when the genome was decoded. I wanted to play around with that idea of information and genome and going mining through this information, literally using it in the mine. But I won't go into it, you'll see it some videos later. And then I discovered this paper by Dr. Engber, who's in Boston area. He's a medical doctor, actually. But he wrote this paper that was really critical for my PhD, actually. The idea of this universal set of building blocks that are from our cells to buildings to the universe, that it's just everywhere. So he used Buckminster Fuller as an example in architectural realm, Snelson, who's a sculptor, an example in sculpture. But then he went further into our skeletons, skeletal structures are actually also tensile structures. Our muscles, the more pressure you put them there, the more they grow, so it's also the idea of tensile. But then you go into the cells and cellular level, and you also find the same thing, that there's tensile structures in cellular level. I found that pretty amazing to think about how you can go from very simple cellular structures to architectures and space and have a similar principle applied. And also the fact that there's no squares really, or cubes in nature. Very rarely, somebody corrected me that there is one or two examples, but generally it's not. It's either spheres or triangles or pentagons, but you don't really see squares. And if you think about the architectures that we reside in, they're mostly cubes, right? So we have to rethink this. So I started thinking about human networks and visualization of networks. And this is an example of looking at the body, and I was looking also in Asian systems. So the Indian chakra system and the Chinese system of medicine and all the points. And also in relation to visualization, this is from Donna Cox, who did this at Illinois, beautiful visualization of internet. And here is a visualization of where you see activity and where you don't. And that became really interesting to me to think in relation to networks and systems that keep expanding. And my work started being really focused on tetrahedrons, hexagons, colors, intervals, and sound waves, and how it all connects. And a few pieces, I'll show you videos of developing that. So this is Bucky Fuller, and one of the most important thing to me that I learned from studying his work is that a lot of people think of him in terms of domes, in terms of architecture, but really what I understood after a while is that he was actually using those structures as prototypes to explain another philosophy of looking at life and how we are all interconnected and how we're part of natural systems, and to build within that on every level. And the idea of integrity. So the idea of tensile integrity is kind of on a geometric level, but it also is about integrity of whatever you do in life, and that became kind of an important thing for him that a lot of people miss out. So
when you say tensile integrity, can you define tensile for me, please?
That's tensegrity is the two words put together, tensile integrity. Tensegrity. So the Buckminster Fuller was the way I got to nanotech. So all of this is to give you a little bit of a sense of a kind of a journey I was taking in searching, and once I found his work really exploring natural systems, and then finding out actually that a year after he passed away, Kroto and Smalley discovered the third carbon molecule, the Buckminster fullerene. And it's called Buckminster fullerene obviously because it was thanks to him that they figured it out. At that time, the equipment wasn't strong enough to really see the structures. They could kind of tell, but they were trying to really understand it when they saw it. And Smalley remembered the dome that he saw in 1967 Expo. He was fascinated by the geometries and kept going back to it and going back and forth, and eventually figured out that the buckyball, the Buckminster fullerene it was called, actually is like a soccer ball. So that really took me into looking also into more of these closed tensile packing systems in natural environments, and all the time juxtaposing natural environments with technological. So this is a picture of the satellite cell phone systems, right? And it's just kind of like a beehive, and these are the towers. But to me, when I think of it, I think, okay, the engineers were not looking at this because of some philosophical reason. It's because the closed packing system really is the most efficient. And then each one of these hexagons becomes kind of this net that's being formed around us, that's buzzing. So to me, it's very much like this beehive of communication that's happening as we're developing more and more. And that's where I'm going to start talking about collaborations in nanosystems. So with 9/11, almost at the same time, there was Governor Gray started a whole initiative to put these large institutes. One of them is CalIT2 at UC San Diego and UC Irvine, and another one is the California Nanosystems Institute that was UCLA, it is UCLA and Santa Barbara. And this was just decided, and it wasn't even built at that point. And I was very interested, what does that mean? How is nanotechnology in any way related to art? And nobody even knew what nanotechnology was, in the art world for sure. So I wanted to have some scientists in the room, and I found out through actually a person who was really into Buckminster Fuller and knew that I just came to campus at that point. he said, there's somebody who's like studying buckyballs, you should check him out. He just came from Zurich, where he was at the IBM lab that got the Nobel Prize for the scanning tunneling microscope. So that's Jim Jędrzejewski. I contacted him and he immediately said, yes, I'll come over, and we started having a conversation. So these are the three different molecules, and that's the buckyball. The reason it's really important, and it's kind of the icon of nanotech, is because you can actually manipulate inside of it. You have the space to really use it to do all kinds of things with materials. So one of the pieces I did, which I'll show you on video, is actually trying to create a whole floor that looks like a carbon molecule that, as you move around, it's interactive, based on looking at this. So this is the actual carbon molecule on the surface. So these are the collaborators I'm going to talk about. This is Jim Jędrzejewski, and on the right, you'll see the video I'll show you, is the first piece we did together. That's called Zero Wave. And this is where you can kind of see how important it is for artists and scientists to work together. Because, first of all, he's been researching buckyballs in a Nobel laureate lab and is very well known and respected for it. But he didn't know who Buckminster Fuller was. And so I gave him the whole rap on that, and I felt very good about myself then. Then he was showing me and explaining to me how the buckyball works. And I went back with a programmer to design it because I said, the way you're showing it to me, the model looks plastic, and I'm imagining it really as something ephemeral and changing. So I went with a programmer, we designed it, came back to him. He said, this is nonsense, it's jumping up and down like a soccer ball, this is not how it works. And I'm, okay, relax. So we went back and we kind of went back and forth, and by the time, it's like our brains were changing on both sides, because I was starting to shift understanding how it works. He was starting to understand the cultural side, and how I'm thinking. And he actually said that he was like interested in the way my brain works because like I come from a different angle in the sciences. And he got Guinness World Records in creating the smallest abacus in the world. So this is it. They actually took molecules and were like, spending time to do it. But what I liked about it, and the reason that it fascinated me, is that once you do it, then it starts it doesn't stay like that. So I love the idea that it's constantly shifting, and I wanted to do something with that. What you see here is my shadow, and so if you imagine the buckyball is projected really large, and you can manipulate it with your shadow. You'll see a video of it. I wanted to show that everything is molecular. I didn't want it to be something that you can only see in a nano lab. And then we worked with Tibetan monks they did the sand mandala,